Welcome back to our show. I'm Alexa, your netball bestie, and together with Jenna, this is Your Netball BestieS. This is where we deep dive into SSN game analysis and what the netball world is currently talking about. We've just finished round 12 of the Suncorp Super Netball, and we've had the biggest upset yet, which we are very excited to talk about. Also, don't forget to hit that follow button and please leave us a 5-star rating if you enjoy this episode. Every 5-star rating really helps our show, which means that we can keep improving the quality as well as being pushed out to a bigger netball fan audience. Jenna, can you please break down the games and the scores for us?
Yep, so we kicked off the round on Saturday with Fever versus Lightning, and Fever took the win 69-54 in a pretty convincing performance. Also on Saturday, in what I think was definitely the upset of the round and possibly the upset of the season, the Mavs took the win over the Swifts 68-64. On Sunday, we had the high stakes game between Vixens and T-Birds, and T-Birds were able to get the job done 56-53. And that was followed by the Firebirds versus Giants, which saw the Giants getting the win 68-63.
So, quick disclaimer, it was Jenna's baby shower on Sunday. So, Jenna decided to make it at 2 p.m. So, which meant that I didn't get to watch either of the games. And I haven't had a chance to watch the minis, but Jenna has. So one of us has at least watched all four of the games. But let's get straight into game one, which was, always our favorite battle, isn't it, Jenna? The Lightning versus Fever.
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely went into this having higher hopes. I really wanted this to be a more tightly contested game, because for me, it doesn't matter who wins out of Lightning and Fever. I obviously go for both teams, but I definitely prefer obviously when it's a bit tighter of a score line. Yeah, I guess last time there was only two in it, so I was kind of expecting something similar this time around, and it was not the case. So in the first half, Lightning initially they just started doing the same things that we've noted before, which is they are passing 3 times more than the opposition are. So their attacking end is requiring so many more back and forth passes, back and forth to the circle, swings around the circle, resets to the transverse line than more than any other team in the competition at the moment. And I can only imagine how incredibly exhausting this must be to play that kind of strategy. Of course, we had a huge out for Lightning, which is Cara Conan. We've seen her battling that foot injury on and off throughout the season. We've seen her have to miss quite a few rounds. And at the moment, although we had a moment of hope where she was announced as a starting 7 player initially, in that 24-hour period, that was very quickly changed, and unfortunately she wasn't able to play. And I can only imagine how difficult this would have been as a coach, knowing that you have to balance the safety and the career of your player, but then also knowing that without one of your most experienced shooters on the court, you are going to have a much steeper battle. And we saw that play out, unfortunately, exactly as we expected. So we had Rue as the starting GS and then Steph in the GA bib, which is her usual position. Now, we have seen Steph had to work so much harder in this duo setup than she normally does with Cara. This is where things start to fall apart for Lightning, is the attacking end. Is that, yes, you could have the defenders having an off day and maybe not getting as many deflections as gains as you would like, but if the midcourt are getting the ball down to the attacking end and the attacking end aren't able to get the ball through the hoop, that is going to be the biggest part that actually affects the scoreline at the end of the day. So the shooters have to be on. There's really no room for error there. I really would have liked to see Jane Cook come on. So she was the replacement player that they brought in. So she's 201 centimeters tall and she's a VNL player. Apparently she has also played in Thunderbirds previously before as well. So she's fairly experienced and she is a very high scoring shooter. She has big numbers behind her. I was shocked and extremely disappointed that we didn't see that change come on when the option was there. We saw no changes in the attacking end other than a bib swap for a short period of time. And unfortunately, as much as a lot of shooters can switch between that GA and GS role, most can't. And I think we see that played out quite obviously here, is that there's a moving circle and then there is that 2 GA options. It's like a moving circle on crack. no one was doing the baseline drives. No one was being a lobbing option. No one was holding high. Everyone was coming out. Everyone was popping forward. And then the defenders were able to essentially predict that and shut them both down in the exact same way at the same time, which then left no option for the feeders to pass to. And we saw that reset option or that turnover. I really would have loved to see that tall holding shooter option utilized, because why bring her on if you're not going to use her? We saw that with Emma Barry the week prior. Try something new, take a risk. It's obviously not working. Well, Fever basically had the upper hand from the beginning of this game to the end. There was very little to any momentum shift. So why not try something different?
I agree. We don't see Lightning taking enough risks. They're set with what they have and they don't want to stray from it, even if it's not working. And I really wanted to see something change. Fever were off to an absolutely blistering start. Just every single person on the team was firing. And I think that was what was so evident to me in this game. The way that everyone at Fever is firing and connected really highlighted the emphasis on how disconnected the Lightning players were. And from the get go, like you said, in that circle, Fever's defense pressure, Dehaney and Sunday had Rue and Steph absolutely smothered. They could not breathe. They could not get ball in there. It's probably what is leading them into what we've been seeing. Too many passes around. But then there were also times where, once again, which we have been seeing for a few weeks now, where they would have ball and instead of going for shot, they would go for 3 more passes to get back into the similar position. And it's just wasting time. I think there was a good stat that I saw. I think it was just over 20 seconds from center pass to goal rate for Fever. And it was over, I think, about 41 seconds for Lightning from center pass to goal. So almost double the time to get from center pass to goal. And I think that it just goes to show like where these two teams are. Fever just continued to play their own game with freedom. Majority of their time, most of their players were free. There was Shanice was having an absolute field day. She really stepped up in this game with the double team on Fowler, which I really enjoyed seeing because I'll always sing Shanice's praises. And she was right in the game being that second option. And I was sort of hoping that we were going to see a bit more of a one-on-one sort of contest with the Lightning players on theirs, but they were just giving Fever so much room, and Fever were absolutely running away with that. They just couldn't be stopped. It was seamless. They, even with the likes of a tall Ash Irvin in front of Fowler and being double teamed, they did not hesitate to absolutely bomb that ball into Fowler and go right over the top of the hands and the head. So I think Fever were there. They played their game. I did notice as well that they were really onto the rebounds as well. So they were putting the pressure on the shot and the passes, but then they were right onto those rebounds. So you can tell that that was definitely probably a focus. Lightning just they just had no answers, which is when I would really like to see them now taking risks, trying something new. You know, you have a whole bench of players, different combinations. You have a replacement player sitting on the bench who's, I think last year in the VNL, she scored 1,000 goals. When you have someone with such a high shooting accuracy, why would you not give it a try?
Yes, this was a very hard game to watch just because it feels like it's a little bit of a repeated pattern of what we're seeing from Lightning more recently. So in the third quarter, Lightning did actually start to get a little bit of momentum, but it dropped off really, really quickly. So we had that initial energy coming out of the half time, and then it really didn't take long for Fever to take control back of that game and put the doubt back into the feeders, and it all came apart. We really saw the Lightning defense have very little to any effect on Fever's attack. As you mentioned, there was that double team on Fowler, which seems to be most teams' go to, but then they're forgetting that you're leaving Beckford completely on her own. And she is not a player you want to be leaving out on her own to own devices, because as we saw in this game, she was really carrying a lot of that shooting load as well. She was taking shots, she was confident, and she was just being left to her own devices for a lot of that. At the moment, there is, I think, no doubt in anyone's mind that Fever is the strongest team in this competition. They have now, I think, broken a record with 10 wins in a row, which is absolutely incredible. Something that really I find has been frustrating as a Lightning and a Liz Watson fan is, I guess, the commentators really highlighting every time Liz Watson gets a turnover. And obviously that's because this is unlike her to have so many turnovers, but I really feel like a lot of that isn't necessarily her fault. Yes, a stepping call is your fault, but a held ball that is not necessarily your fault. If you are getting put into a position where you are having to reset and reset and swing around the circle and swing around the circle, or be in a position where no one is coming forward, I've said this before in regards to when you are that player that everyone relies on to come forward, come forward, come forward, and be that option. Sometimes no one then thinks to be that option for you. So then you are left with the ball in hand and no one open for a pass. So I did like that we didn't see as many of those congested short front passes from Lightning this week that we commented a lot about last week. They seem to definitely, were making progress in trying to make space and prevent that congestion in the middle corridor. But again, it was just that shooting end that I really don't think the middies could do any more than what they were doing.
Yeah, no, I can see. I think in this game, though, I think because, Liz is such a great player, she does get held to a high standard. So, of course, they're going to be, feel propelled to comment on things like that. But yeah, I think also mainly that could be part of the reason. But we have also seen her possibly not have her best season this year either in terms of consistency. And I think in a game where you put up Alice Teague-Nield, who's currently leading in majority of categories and absolutely having a killer season this year, and Liz Watson, you're going to draw the comparisons. We've been seeing them all week. So that also probably was a little bit like why they felt the need to comment. But yeah, I think it's also just a credit to Fever's defense, putting that pressure on and smothering all the options and no one coming forward.
Going to be very interesting come Diamonds selections, which maybe we should prepare to do that for next week's episode and put our Diamonds predictions up.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, actually.
Okay, so moving on to game 2 of the round and of Saturday. So the absolute wow. My goodness, I'm still like in shock about the result of this game. The Mavericks versus the Swifts. So at the beginning of this game, the Swifts were still the top of the ladder. The clear favourite was going to be Swifts, even though we have seen them not performing at, their best over the last few rounds. This was definitely the biggest upset of the season because Mavericks have been consistently underperforming every single round. Even when they beat the Firebirds, they were playing the bottom of the ladder. So the Swifts went into this game probably really thinking that they would retain their top of the ladder position. I think everyone did. In the first, 5 or 6 minutes, that definitely looked like that's what the case was going to be. It's because you and I were talking, Jenna, and we thought, oh gosh, this is going to be a blowout. Mavs have no chance because in the first 5 or 6 minutes alone, they were like at 1-7 or 1-8, some crazy early deficit out of nowhere. The Mavs completely turned things around. We saw them play at a level that we have not seen them play yet. And this was not only, like a real underdog story where everyone loves an underdog and, we were all kind of like cheering for someone to take Swifts off the top of the ladder. My goodness, they deserved this. This was not down to a super shot shootout, desperation, or, maybe some errors or bad calls from umpires. No, this was a clear domination by the Mavs over the Swifts, and it was bloody impressive. So in the second quarter, we had the best defensive matchup, in my opinion, was really evident against the Swifts end. So we've seen Fever was a really good matchup against Swifts as well, but we really did see the Grenvold versus Wecky as being elite. We've seen Grace really fumble a few balls recently. Her confidence seems to have taken a few knocks after like a very, very strong start in the season. But I think that Grenvold had her absolutely figured out. It was funny, we were mentioning how we were seeing Houseby play a more GA role than we've seen her mostly play this season. But I think to their detriment because they completely lost their ability to have those long feeds into Grace, those clean feeds from behind the transverse line until the very end of this game. So was that a mistake to get Helen Houseby to try and insert herself into that game more? Because Brown had her worked out.
Yeah, I think it was. I thought Grenvold she just came on so strong. I think it was within a few seconds she got her first turnover, which was beautiful. I think there was probably so much pressure on Grace that, Helen felt the need to step up. And like you said, I think that was to their detriment because Helen, I don't think I've seen her that visibly off in a very long time.
I wanted to point out a few notable highlights from this game that was very entertaining. So first of all, the Mavs won the first quarter by 1, which was the first shock But then, we also thought, yeah, but Swifts are going to come back from this. They did it to Giants. Like, Swifts are really good in second half of games. In the second quarter, there was this incredible moment where I think it might have been initially Palmy's deflection, and then we saw almost a
Oh,
five-player effort of keeping this ball in and turning it over. It was messy at times and others just brilliant. Honestly, like you have to go back and watch the replay if you haven't seen it. It was beautiful.
that was really good. I remember also saying, like, before the game, going into this game, I thought, the Mavs can be known to be a bit inconsistent in their sort of performance. They have their hot and cold moments. Like we saw last week, we saw a lot more of a consistent performance. Again, we saw a lot more, I mean, bar the first 6, 7 minutes of quarter one.
And then we saw something which is always a surprise, where we saw Houseby benched for Fawns. So there was a moment where Houseby was being quite ineffective, and so they brought Fawns on, and this was outside of the super shot period. This was literally just in normal time. What was really interesting was when it got to the super shot time, they brought on that moving circle with Houseby and Fawns, but the Mavs defense somehow managed to keep them to 0 super shot attempts, 0 super shots at all with both Fawns and Houseby on the court. It was so ineffective that for the last 2 minutes of the super shot minutes, we actually saw Grace back on as a desperate attempt to try and get some ball through the hoop. And then we saw the Mavs finish up the second quarter and going to halftime with a 3-goal lead, which means they won both of those first 2 quarters. Coming out of halftime, that's when we saw probably the best quarter yet from Mavs. So we did see a few hesitating moments with feeding the ball to Jock, which was a little bit of a surprise to me because Jock had done nothing but be consistent and great with her takes in the air. If anything, she was proving just how strong she was with her takes. So I was surprised that we saw a little bit of hesitation from the feeders. But we saw a really amazing intercept by Sasha, and then she actually helped bring the ball down, drove straight to the circle, and ended it with a goal, which was definitely the highlight of the game for her. At this point, the Swifts were playing at a really manic rate, and then we saw the Mavs actually start to match that energy, and they forgot to play at their own speed. They were kind of playing panicked as if they weren't winning the game, which was bizarre. And so it was a well-timed timeout by Tracy Neville to just kind of, set a little calm in the girls and, remind them that they were actually up, because they actually won the third quarter by 11 goals, which is insane. In the last quarter, that's when things got a little bit more stressful. So obviously the Mavs went in with that 11-goal lead, but we did see Swifts start to improve how they were feeding Grace. And suddenly we saw them kind of revert back to what was working really well for them in the earlier season, which was those clean, really accurate feeds to like lob passes straight down to Grace, which worked really, really well. And then when we got to the super shot time period, Swifts actually started getting some super shots, and this was the most stressful period as you just watched the entire stadium just like take a breath as we watched Swifts do what they do best, which is essentially, they win games in the final minutes of matches based on Houseby's super shots alone. That is like a tried and tested strategy that they have, and we did not want that to happen because the Mavs had deserved that win. So it was such a relief that they actually ended up winning by a 4-goal lead, which, just goes to show how good the Swifts were because they did start it with an 11-goal lead.
Oh my God, it was stressful. And I just kept saying, like, come on, Mavs, like, come on. Like, this is the Mavs we've wanted to see all along.
Jovic got the MVP for the second time in a row. So she has back-to-back MVP performances, which is very, very impressive. And I'm sure Stacey is keeping an eye on her. The last 2 games of the round, unfortunately, I didn't get to watch the Vixens versus T-Birds, and then I had the score spoiled for me. But we did have the TV playing the Giants and Firebirds game during your baby shower yesterday. So we were in and out of that game, and obviously saw the result. But let's touch on the Vixens T-Birds quickly, because Jenna, I believe you caught up on this one.
Yes, I went back and I watched both of them. It was a very Vixens have coming off of the back of a lot more of a consistent performance lately, but this was a game where we saw them sort of revert back to that inconsistent, a little off sort of game. We knew going into this one, obviously being another grand final rematch, that the pressure was going to be on, and also with the loss of Lightning now, the pressure was even higher because of ladder positions. But yeah, so we saw some really good defensive pressure from Thunderbirds to start. they kept the shooters very high and out of the circle and constantly having to reset on the transverse line. Laddie in GD, which I think was a really smart move because as we've sort of realized, she's a lot more better on the fly, and that's how she wins ball, and that's exactly what she did. Was she was able to win a lot of ball for her side. The Vixen shooters do get a little bit intimidated by the Thunderbirds defenders, and we did see a bit more of that again, making some really silly errors, fumbling ball out of court. Even some of they were in their own heads from very early on in the game. It was a very stark contrast between seeing her best performance in not last week, the week before, to now seeing something that was definitely not to that same standard. They just really get in their heads about the Thunderbirds defense and they really struggle against them. I noticed in this game as well, Rudy was having a really good crack at a lot of the ball coming into Aiken. Her footwork has definitely improved, the way that she was moving around the body. So that was really good. But another thing that I noticed was it was a very bit of a sloppy sort of game from both sides. There were a lot of silly errors. It was just very flat and stagnant, especially for the Vixens. There was just no sense of urgency or chase. Like a ball would get knocked out and then around the attacking edge of the circle, and the shooters would just sort of watch it. There was no sense of urgency to chase the ball. The Thunderbirds then we saw making some mistakes of their own. There was times where within the space of 2 minutes, two of their players just dropped the ball out of court. Tanya called a timeout, asking for them to start providing a second option because they were starting to sort of quieten up a bit and to take a breath. And then they actually went back out there and played worse and made more mistakes than they were making prior. So then, of course, we saw another timeout get called only a few minutes later, where Aiken was actually the one that stood up and said, we're still in this. We can't just wait for the umpires to do something. Let's get on with it. So then we saw the game continue. It was a very close scoreline back and forth. I was surprised that we didn't see Lily Graham come on at any point.
I was going to ask you, did
Yeah.
Lily Graham come on?
No, so we didn't see her come on at any point. I would have liked to seen her come on because when we have seen her come on previously, she's come in confidently and strong and unfazed. And I think Vixens needed a little bit of that, considering how they were sort of traveling. We saw the Thunderbirds just get away and get the win, but it could have really gone either way.
I'm glad one of us watched this game. I will probably catch up with it after I finish editing this. For now, let's move on to the final game of the round, which was the Firebirds versus Giants. Firstly, big congratulations to Jo Harten on her 200th game. What an amazing milestone to reach. There was a big surprise in the scoreline. So as I mentioned earlier, I was kind of in and out of this game at your baby shower, just kind of watching it on the screen every now and then. And I think we were all just very surprised at how close this game was, given the quality of performance that Giants has been putting out lately versus the quality that Firebirds have been putting out lately. I was very surprised to see that there were really only a few goals in it. But what were the biggest takeaways that you found, Jenna?
There was a little bit of a throwing away ball, winning ball, and not being able to convert. We saw Abby get the start again, which was a good vote of confidence considering we saw her start last week coming off a good performance. As well, one of the key standouts for me was Sligo. She was absolutely all over it. She was getting a hand in everything. I think as well, we've been seeing previously with Kapoa and O'Brien, their very long arm over the shot. This was again proven to be a really good tactic because we saw Abby very intimidated by that long lean. Saw as well in the first quarter that the super shot started raining early. Even Mary got up there with her first super shot. We did see a lot of held bowls by the Firebirds in the third quarter. We did also see a moment where I don't know if you've seen the clip yet, but JLP and Ruby Bakewell Doran got into a very heated clash.
No, I didn't see that. I didn't see that.
Oh, I'll have to clip it. I think it happened towards the end of the third quarter, but we see them sort of going for ball out of court, and JLP being the absolute force she is, doesn't get knocked. Ruby comes flying probably a tad too late, and we sort of see Jamie go to pick up the ball and sort of pull around and shove Ruby sort of out of the way with ball in hand. And the look on Jamie's face, like she was pissed. But yeah, so in the third quarter, we saw that there was only one goal in it after Giants were leading in the beginning. The quarter ended with one goal in it by a super shot by Moore, because we saw that moving circle coming on again. Fourth quarter lead was to actually the Firebirds were leading most of the fourth quarter, but unfortunately just wasn't enough to get across the line, and the Giants were able to get up and over.
Let's go straight to our player of the match. So for me, it's from Mavericks, and I'm going to give mine to Palmy, who I think just she elevates her team so much with her perfect timed intercepts that just riles them up. It swings momentum, and we saw her do that again and again in this game.
Mine would be Sligo, possibly again.
Yeah.
Um, I just think she's just been building so well, and she has just the way she's in every contest, she's got a hand in everything. She chases ball down, she fights to the end. I've been really enjoying watching her play and coming into her own.
That's it from us from round 12. Thank you so much for listening this week. Please let us know what you think in the comments. Follow us on Spotify. Leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show, and we will see you next week.